again, I wouldn't say Dr. Chakraborty and Jyotiman. Jyotiman and Sanchayita, they are very old and dear friends, and I'm so happy to be here. First of all, my deepest apologies for missing some of your papers for the last couple of days. I had absolutely no way of rescheduling my classes so as to be able to come and attend this earlier. I'm sure I missed some wonderful papers. I'm sorry about that. And thanks again for this very kind invitation to talk about something that I've been working on for a while, broadly speaking, Bengali modernisms. But having said that, this is the first time I'm going to present on Jivanananda Das's novels. So it's also a work in progress paper, and I look forward to your responses and questions and criticisms and accusations and denigrations, everything. Okay, the paper is titled Interior Monologue as Social Polylogue in Jivanananda Das's Novels. Let me go straight in. It's a very old style presentation. Attention is all I'm requesting, nothing else. I won't have a PPT. This paper situates Jivanananda Das's novels, most of which were discovered and published posthumously, as you know, in the tradition of Bengali modernist novel, with a purpose to connect Jivanananda with the network of global modernisms and world literature. I'm interested in understanding the particularity, if not the peculiarity, that lies in Jivanananda Das's use of the modernist interior monologue in his deeply introspective and philosophical novels of consciousness. Kolkata Chhatchi, Leaving Kolkata 1932, Karu Bashona 1933, and Malda 1948. How does the William Jamesian stream of consciousness, christened into the silent, psychic speech of the interior monologue by modernist literary studies, travel to India and Bengal? How does this literary form make inroads into the life of the society? How does it index the familial, the social, and the political, and relieve the form of its atomist, individualist cliches? How does this novel of bare existence, to invoke an expression Shandipan Chattapadhayay once used to qualify Das's novels, rethink the novel form's representational relation with the social and the political? I would rename Das's monologues social polylogues with distinct slants towards social relations. Their stretch across vicissitudes of space-time activate what could be called the cosmopolitical and the ecological in this train of thinking in the novel. As Amit Chaudhary has rightly pointed out, Tagore's 1907 essay on the nursery rhymes, Chele Bhulano Chhora, from the collection Lokosahitya, contains what is perhaps the first major theorization of the stream of consciousness in modern Bengali literature. Chaudhary notes how Tagore's essay on nursery rhymes and nonsense verse talks about everyday consciousness and the fragments whirling in its stream. Following Tagore's reflections on the workings of the human mind in this essay, we find an interplay between the everyday flow of scattered experience and the filtering capacity of consciousness that in its act of focusing can create a stream, or what Rabindranath calls probaho, by selecting some experiences and senses over others. I'm just going to read a little bit from the Bengali paragraphs and then perhaps do a very quick translation. I mean, it's a little sad not to read out Rabindranath in the original because the translation clearly doesn't do justice to the rich rhetoricity of his Bangla. স্বভাবত আমাদের মনের মধ্যে বিশ্বজগতের প্রতিবিম্ব এবং প্রতিধ্বনি ছিন্ন বিচ্ছিন্নভাবে ঘুরিয়া বেড়ায়। তারা বিচিত্র রূপ ধারণ করে এবং অকস্মাৎ প্রসঙ্গ হইতে প্রসঙ্গান্তরে গিয়া উপনীত হয়। যেমন বাতাসের মধ্যে পথের ধূলি, পুষ্পের রেণু, অসংখ্য গন্ধ, বিচিত্র শব্দ, বিচ্ছিন্ন পল্লব, জলের শিকড়, পৃথিবীর বাষ্প, এই আবর্তিত জগতের বিচিত্র উৎক্ষিপ্ত উড্ডীন খণ্ডাংশ সকল সর্বদাই নিরর্থকভাবে ঘুরিয়া ফিরিয়া বেড়াইতেছে, আমাদের মনের মধ্যেও সেই রূপ। সেখানেও আমাদের নিত্য প্রবাহিত চেতনার মধ্যে কত বর্ণ, গন্ধ, শব্দ, কত কল্পনার বাষ্প, কত চিন্তার আভাস, কত ভাষার ছিন্ন খণ্ড, আমাদের ব্যবহার জগতের কত শত পরিত্যক্ত, বিস্তৃত, বিচ্যুত পদার্থ সকল অলক্ষিত অনাবশ্যক ভাবে ভাসিয়া ভাসিয়া বেড়ায়। And it goes on like that. I'm just going to come back to something. But then here is the point where he's talking about focusing. এই সমস্ত ছায়াময়ী মরীচিকা মুহূর্তের মধ্যে অপসারিত হয় when we focus, আমাদের কল্পনা, আমাদের বুদ্ধি একটা বিশেষ ঐক্য অবলম্বন করিয়া একাগ্রভাবে প্রবাহিত হইতে থাকে। This is the প্রবাহ I mentioned. আমাদের মন নামক পদার্থটি এত অধিক প্রভুত্বশালী যে সে যখন সজাগ হইয়া বাহির হইয়া আসে তখন তাহার প্রভাবে আমাদের অন্তর্জগতের এবং বহির্জগতের অধিকাংশই সমাচ্ছন্ন হইয়া যায়। And it goes on. I'm just going to do a quick English translation. This is by Suchishmita Sen. Disconnected reflections on the outside world drift regularly across our minds without any conscious effort. They take on different shapes and forms, effortlessly jumping from one subject to another. Just as dust, pollen, smells, noises, leaves, and drop of moisture float aimlessly in the world around us. Colors, smells, sounds, fantasies, scattered thoughts, snatches of conversation, fragments of experience wander randomly through our minds. But this is the point about focusing. When we concentrate our thoughts on a particular topic, these excess murmurs cease. These thoughts fly away, these fantasies shatter, and our mind and imagination start flowing in a single stream. I'll stop here, there's a little bit more in this passage, but for reasons of time I won't go into it. Now, Tagore's idea of psychological streamlining approximates the stream of consciousness of the interior monologue, but instead of the modernist celebration of random everyday consciousness, Tagore's emphasis falls on the filtering out of unimportant things, whereby consciousness holds fort against the distracting diversity of human experience. Though his idea of the stream of consciousness is not expressly social or political, Tagore signals a cohesion of the inner and the outer worlds in the act of mental focusing. The interior monologue is a way of experiencing the world and not just one's own mind. I think this is a critical point. This is the first inclination towards alterity. In a July 1925 summer entry from his diary, Jivanananda Das writes the following about consciousness. And as you know, for those who have read the diary, much of it is in English. This is actually in English. Matter and materialism are not dead in our scheme of life. They're only moribund. They lie hid in the subconscious regions of the mind. Time and oft, the placid, still ponds of our consciousness get disturbed by big boulders from outside, a friend's worldly success or a nation's grand achievement in the realm of matter, unquote. In this English language entry that mentions hedonistic materialism as a moribund element hidden in the folds of human consciousness, or what Das calls the subconscious regions, he talks about a process of disturbance brought in by big boulders that unsettle the calm water of consciousness. Without going into the idea of jealousy he's reflecting upon, let me underline the fundamental point that the inner life of consciousness can be disrupted by the big boulders coming in from the life outside, i.e. the life of the social. The diary entries of April 1929 mention multiple social and political events like the anti-child marriage Sharoda Bill, the public debate around the British offering India dominion status. These diaries also mention Joyce's Ulysses among other literary references. He compares Lavanya with Bloom. We will come back to discuss the Joycean monologue soon. The point at this stage, however, is to document Jivanananda Das's political awareness and indicate how we can connect it with his idea of introspective consciousness that is invaded by the outer life of the social. In Jivanananda Das's novels, we will notice a shift from interior monologue to what I'm calling social polylogue, where the ethics of alterity is central. But before doing so, let me situate his novels in relation to his critical musings about this form and its historical juncture in the 20th century Bengal and India. In a 1950 English language essay published in the Hindustan Standard titled The Bengali Novel Today, Jivanananda Das connects the disintegration of the novel form in England and Bengal with the decline of the middle classes, the post-war economic crisis, and the event of partition. It shows how he sees a mimetic link between political events and the novel form. He makes a curious remark about the paradox, I quote, of modern existence, again quoting, and once again I'm quoting, each novelist's individual experience appears to shrink and become more and more specialized as the extent and complexity of the total human experience augment all around, unquote. For him, on the one hand, modern life grows vastly complex, and on the other, it forces the novelists into tight niches that lack what Dash calls the historically profound, quote unquote, again, quote unquote, this is a very interesting expression he uses, cosmic mold, where I'm borrowing the word cosmopolitical from. Sorry. In Das's opinion, it is this lack of cosmic sweep and its historicity that reduces the Bengali novel of the late 1940s to what he calls diversified autobiography, unquote. In another English language essay, The Novel in Bengal, he defends the use of extra or non-narrative discursivity in the novel, invoking European modernists like Proust, Joyce, and Mann. Be it Tagore's Gour or Sharatchandra's novels and stories, he does not find the discursivity, that kind of discursivity, in the modern Bengali novel form. As he says, and I quote again, this is also in English originally, plots more or less well conceived, instead of streams of consciousness, still hold the sway in Bengali novels, unquote. As we can see from the quote above, he's more than aware of the idea of stream of consciousness and considers its presence minor in the Bengali novel. Though he is impressed by Manik, Tarashankar, Vibhutibhushan among others, he observes that the post-Tagorian Bengali novelists do not offer any new, quote, technique or stream, unquote, that makes their form unique. In the 1952 essay, Lekhar Kotha, this is in Bangla of course, Jivanananda Das shows what is a typical poet's bias while talking about the differential work of consciousness in the writing of poetry and prose. For him, poetry requires a complete unification of consciousness, whereas prose works more with logic. For him, this is the expression in Jivanananda, Chetona Garo Manthan, or a dense churning of consciousness, is almost exclusive to poetry. As we should see in his novels, when he offers this dense churning of consciousness, it is the poetic discourse that injects itself into the novel form, transforming it into a polylogical work of consciousness. In another English language in another English essay, The Future of the Novel, 1952, Jivanananda Das doesn't entirely agree with the thesis that the art of the novel is essentially individualist, and claims that the novel must pursue the universal and the collective by making different languages into one language, taking the cue from Thomas Mann. However, he doesn't defend a political art of the novel either. And again, this is I'm quoting from his text. The novelist will have done his best if, like Clemens, the Irishman, he writes a tale in which all linguistic, nationalistic, and ideologic groups become, as it were, one language and a universal story because it is a story of deep human interest. Trust me, more so in IIT, in spite of the Mr. Pusher. I don't think this one works. Sorry, bro. And don't worry. Okay. For Jivanananda, this figure of the a universal that passes through the linguistic, the ideological, and the socio-political, will transcend all of them to become a human tale of values that appeal to readers across national borders. Though he seems to end this brief essay on a rather dark note about the future of the novel form, losing out in technology, cinema, and radio, important question for now, there is a latent confidence too about the novel's survival. Instead of deepening this thread, I want to insist on this idea of the unifying, not homogenizing, universal, and the ethics of the common it underlines and pursue its consequences in Deuteronomy. And of course, look at his own novels in relation to this statement that we don't have enough stream of consciousness in Bengali novels. But before moving into Jivanananda Das, and I'm aware of time, so I'll begin to contract things a little bit. There is a sort of dialectical interplay of monologue and polylogue in the context of the modernist novel that I want to briefly touch upon. So if we take Molly Bloom's largely unpunctuated speech at the end of Joyce's Ulysses as a paradigm for this form, modernist interior monologue, it is important to note that one of the most famous philosophical leaders of the speech, Derrida, Jacques Derrida, in his 1984 talk, Ulysses' Gramophone, sharply criticizes the use of the word monologue to describe it. Just to give one instance, to call this a monologue is to display a somnambulistic carelessness, Derrida says. And he reflects further, Molly's monologue, from the moment there is yes, the famous yes in the monologue, or the so-called monologue, a break will have been made in the monologue, the other is hooked up somewhere on the telephone, unquote. The yes that oscillates between the subject and the other breaks the monologue with a trace of the dialogic. But the speech is not a simple dialogue either. The Joycean yes makes the speech tremble and hesitate between what Derrida calls a manifest monologue and a manifest dialogue. Moreover, multiple others are invoked in Molly's polyphony of voices, which Derrida aptly calls mental telephony. Following him, we can argue that Molly's speech echoes a primacy of the social other over the self and thus cannot be called a monologue. It is more of a polylogue. Now, to introduce this term from perhaps its most famous literary articulation, in Kristeva's 1977 essay about the novel form as polylogue, which is a reading of Philip Soller's 1973 novel, H, the concept assumes a dissident mark of the social. And I'm going to quote in parts, this is a bit complicated, this text. Spelled out here, I quote from Kristeva, there is a dialectics between limit and dismembered infinity, between sight and rhythm, between meaning and music, and between bank and stream. Dialectics as an epitome of language. Yet, the polylogue text, which only this dialectics can construct, emphasizes music above all, and through it the mute matter of language. It is a polemic with finitude, with pause, with totality, with a thesis of socialization that is also and simultaneously bounding and deadly. So the polylogue has something to do with the thesis of socialization, though it is dissident vis-a-vis that. Kristeva, this concept brings out the disturbing rhythms in language. It is a sonic and musical register of disruptive noise that overpowers linguistic sense and radicalizes the discourse. The structure of the polylogue disrupts the social as well as the normative process of socialization. It's in a way, I mean, again, I'm cutting short of few things here. For Kristeva, it is a mark of the transfinite in language, and it opens towards the alterity of the common. She doesn't use this word, I'm using this word in its Negrian overture. I come to Negri very soon. For Kristeva, of course, as you can see already, the polylogue is political. And this is a quick quote to justify that. There could be no polylogical subject, I'm still quoting Kristeva, without this new stratified, multiplied, and recurring political topos, which demonstrably has nothing to do with classical, dogmatic, and merely linear political positions that incarnate a familial time structure within a familial discourse. I'll just underline this question of family here.
The inseparability of politics and polylogue appears as the guarantee of a meeting between the subject's unsettling process and that of history. Unquote. Now, I come back to the family as a unit of the social and the function of the polylogue there in Karma very soon. But just to continue a little bit, what we can see here in this polylogical discourse is a sort of further dialecticization of the Bakhtinian idea of the novel as a discursive dialogue. The dialogue becomes a polylogue by encountering the novel as a figure of the common. The dialogue, in a sense, is too bifocal. We need a discursive multiplicity, and the polylogue supports this infinitely pluralistic sharing. Which brings me to Negri, and a very long section that I'll now have to cut short for one more time. But of course, Antonio Negri is one of the foremost critical thinkers of the common in our times. In the 2008 In Praise of the Common, Negri discusses this idea with Cesare Cassarino, who in the preface posits the common as a discourse of conversation that abhors monologues. Cassarino argues, for the common is that which is always at stake in any conversation. There where a conversation takes place, there the common expresses itself, there where we are in common, there and only there is a conversation possible. Conversation is the language of the common. Unquote. He foregrounds communication over community in this figure of the common. In fact, as early as an empire, you would note, Arthur Negri figured the common as the foundation for the capitalist mode of production. So it is a counter-revolutionary idea to start with. It is privatized, this common, and synonymous with the capital and the exploitative surplus value. Negri and Cassarino's project, at least in the 2008 book, is to appropriate the common into a negation of the capital. For them, there is something of the common that escapes the logic of the capital. And again, Cassarino elaborates on this point. I'll just try and summarize this. So, let me actually quote this part. The qualitative difference, this is Cassarino, between capital and the common consists in positing surplus in different ways, in engaging surplus to different ends. Surplus value is living surplus as separation in the form of value par excellence, namely money. Surplus common is living surplus as incorporation in the forms of the common, including and especially our bodies. So we come back to this sort of polylogical focus on materialism of the body. The linguistic materialism in Kristeva finds a corporeal materialism here. The idea of the common, one could say, takes its root in Negri's famous concept of the multitude of singularities as a site of affirmative political action and real democracy. Because democracy, for him and a lot of continental political philosophers, is the power of the multitude that remains irreducible to governmentality. It is worth mentioning that he also considers art as a form of multitude, as a critique of market forces. And I'm thinking of the book Art and Multitude, which is a series of his letters. It is the task of the multitude to create the common. In his latest book, for example, The Common, Negri poses the question about what it is that we are willing to share with others. For example, are we willing to share a percentage of public welfare with the refugees? As he observes, if we are only willing to share the surplus, is that real sharing? I mean, questions that. Instead of approaching sharing in individualist terms, he comes at the problem from a democratic collectivist lens. I quote, a collectivity that is willing to produce through sharing. But this is the problem, because this productive aspect of sharing takes us back to the neoliberal biopolitical market, where the common is a figure of the capitalism. How do we produce an alternative sharing which has an ethic to it that surpasses the productive logic of market relations? This is Negri's definition of the common from this book that I mentioned, the 2023 collection of essays called The Common. The collective, I quote Negri, the collective is founded on a common that it continually produces and reproduces, a common that reveals itself in this way, the substantive foundation of the collective. As example, he mentions the May 1968 student movement in France and the 2011 Occupy movements. he identifies political subjectivities instead of masses. This is, I think, an important point here, that instead of masses, the multitude constitutes political subjectivities, singular subjectivities, which breaks down the commonsensical division between the individual and collective. And for Negri, this is not a Weberian ethics of love or responsibility. It's about sharing everybody's right to life and the recognition by the collective about everybody's right to life. Life is to be shared, and everyone's right, and quoting again, right to life must be protected simply because, and I quote, life along with producing is a common thing. So not reducing life to production, but as a shareable entity. But again, perhaps the most unshareable of the shareable entity. Anyway, I'll come back to this paradox later. Let me now move a little bit, cutting a few sections from the Negri part. I can come back to it if there are questions. But of course, they also identified, in Commonwealth, the 2009 book, there is this developing notion of the common again. And the idea of the multitude and the common work together in that. There's also this idea of the family as a sort of site of narcissism and individualism, because the family is, for them, in the book Commonwealth, one of the false ideas of the common. It's one of the pseudo-commons, as it were. I mean, even if a family apparently wants collective progress, it's usually for the purposes of, let's say, the family member. I mean, that's their point anyway. Plus, it's also patriarchal, gender normative, and all of that, which is another reason why they characterize it negatively. Let me now, for the, how much time do I have? 10, 15 minutes? 5 minutes? Okay, I'll really have to be brutal with you on those examples, I'm sorry. Can I take 5 extra minutes? Is it all right? Just, I'll try and conclude in 10 minutes for sure. Yeah, it's already 11:35, sorry. Okay, so with Kolkata Chhatri, now I'm going to try and cut down on the extended quotes that I had. With Kolkata Chhatri, the first part of the novel, in fact, the opening section, is this very interesting conversation between the narrator, the first person narrator, and the friend Jyoti in College Street. What it does, in a way, and I'm summarizing things, is to look at continental literature as a commodity in the colonial Calcutta of the 1930s. The character, for example, cannot buy the novels of Anatole France, Aldous Huxley, James Lawrence, James Joyce, Virginia Woolf, Marcel Proust. They're all mentioned by name. The book is mentioned, and the fact that with the very low income, the protagonist doesn't have the wherewithal to buy these novels, that becomes a question. And also, Jyoti's point about whether one could make a living being a novelist in India. So, I mean, there is this sort of identification of the common as this twin point of colonial commodity on the one hand, but also the possibility of aesthetic education, as it were. Again, I'm just going to stop there with that particular moment. There is this moment of the so-called interior monologue in Kolkata Chhatri, where there's a moment of the third person narrator talking about the central character, him. Sorry, him is from Tamil Bhasha, I'm mixing it up. This is the unnamed narrator, in fact. So he's on a steamer in the water, and it's evening. He watches urban life unfold itself around him at the end of the day. For example, a Muslim man applying kajal on people's eyes, taking money, the dockyard workers coming and going. Kolkata is exhausted at the end of the day. And then he looks at the moon, and the moon that reminds him of his own childhood. I'm just going to quote, unfortunately, the bad English translation by me. Alongside the river where the bamboo trees crowded in, the moon would rise every day as if the little intermediary of the bamboo trees was only inside us. The bamboo leaves kept moving and striking the moon. The moon was so deeply intimate back then. So again, this poetic discourse of consciousness, the churning as we were talking about it, and this very interesting, almost surreal image of the bamboo leaves striking the moon. This is sort of almost a flagellating image. Again, I can't go into the details, but this is a shared ecological common of everyone, and yet the image is suffused with this very individualized lyricism that can only occur to a singular individual. This image of the bamboo shoots, as it were, striking the moon, and the moon suffering, as it were. So what is intimate is what is shared and what is unshareable in the same breath. In Taru Bashana, I really don't have the time, unfortunately. There's this absolutely brilliant section where there's a dialogue, as it were, between him, the protagonist, and the mother, this time in third person narration. And the word ma, or mother, becomes a placeholder. There are 15 such occurrences in the middle of this dialogue where the mother doesn't say anything. And Jivanaranga simply uses ma and three dots and ellipses. And then we have Ames dialogue. This is what I wanted to talk about in what would not be possible now. But again, the point being that the monologue is broken by this conversational structure of the other. Here, almost from the position of an interior monologue, of a dramatic monologue, which means that there is a silent listener. The mother is a silent listener. And there's also a lot to be said about the mother as a representative of the family, how Aim cannot reach out to her, more importantly, how she cannot enter into this conversation. And there's a sort of unbridgeable gap, as it were, between the protagonist and the family. There's a double bind here. Of course, this is the family in Kolkata, but he also realizes that the family is a confining space for the flight of his imagination and what he wants to do in life. Again, I'll just cut short the rest of what I have to say about the moment and quickly end with Malda. Malda, of course, is perhaps the most monological of these novels. There's a lot to do for anyway. Malda, of course, as you know, begins the day realizing and in a way unforgetting that it is his 42nd birthday, and it goes into a certain interior monologue. But again, without going into too many details for lack of time, these monologues have a certain regression into the past. In this case, he goes back to his rural days away from Calcutta when he was a boy, mentions all the baul songs that used to drive him into another world. And again, very quickly, this section can't afford to have the bad translation here. Je jol ganer moto, je gan joler moto, charidikar খেজুর ছড়ি নারকোল ঝিরিঝিরি ঝাউয়ের সনসনানি ছায়া অন্ধকার একটি তারার ভেতর এক কিনারে চুপ করে বসে থাকতো সে. You can see the sonority of the language. That's impossible in the English. But again, the point is what we have in these monologues, and I'm just going to conclude now, is this constant move towards the outward reality. It's not an inward term, it's outward, and it constantly shows this oscillation between the social force that wants to normativize and tame the consciousness of the, let's say, the imaginative person in this case. Again, we have this figure of the uncle who wants to take him back from his flight of imagination into the real practical world, as it were. Won't really go into it. The last paragraph and I'm finished. To conclude, what emerges from Jivanaranga Das's novels is a self-aware use of stream of consciousness as interior monologue that becomes a social polylogue. It gives primacy to the other, creates polyphony, registers the automatism of social experiences and impressions as a transfinite totality, and highlights a planetary lining of the cosmopolitical. So we don't have that focusing and that elimination that we have in Tagore's idea. It is not that the social polylogue is unique to the misnomer interior monologue in Dash or the Bengali novel, as we see Derrida spotting it in Joyce at the very heart of European modernism. However, the polylogue in Dash not only marks social telephony, as in Joyce, but also highlights the submission to the other as a figure of the common. If the subject acknowledges the normativist presence of social others, it also sees an ethic in opening itself to the other as the common in the socially marginalized people. Unfortunately, I couldn't read out that part in Karuna. the subject's unitary selfhood becomes common and merges with the other in an act of democratic hospitality. Invoking Negri's idea of the common as a homology for the polylogue allows us to see the becoming common, this becoming common of the subject as a form of multitude. There is no desubjectivation in Jivanananda Dashi's novels, but an experience of the subject becoming common in the act of opening itself to the otherness of the other. It is the singularity of the subject that makes it into a multitude, a la Negri. The social polylogue in Jivanananda allows us to articulate this multitude of subjective singularities. The difference lies, however, in the point that for Negri, the common is not ontological but political, whereas in Das, the ontological itself creates the room. For the social, I'm hesitating on the word political because, to be fair to Jivanananda, it doesn't really go political in these sections, that gradually perhaps awaits to become the political. It is in what Das calls the cosmic mold, this cosmic mold of the historical, that the ontological is infused with the other's being that politicizes the subject. Thank you.